What's going on, you guys? Today I want to bring you something I find extremely interesting. As many of you guys know, I don't really post videos or talk about things on this channel too much lately unless I find them very exciting or relevant. So that's what I want to talk about today. And it's not going to be this. I want to compare this to something else that I really want to delve into in the video. Long term, I'm going to be talking about closing out October 2019, closing out 2019 in general, and really how exciting this movement into the second half of 2020 is going to be, in my opinion. But one thing I do want to get out of the way as well is that since I haven't posted a video in about 5 weeks or so, I do want to say, still buying cryptocurrency, and I'm still just as invested as ever, in case you guys were wondering. I do get comments here and then asking if I'm still alive and stuff like that. So yes, it's another reason I want to come on and just post a quick little update. But without any further ado, I do want to take a look at this. So if you even just Google search Bitcoin long-term chart, this is a very common chart that you'll see. It's kind of like you can see the pattern here. You can see this movement from essentially straight up to curving off. And that's kind of like the prediction for many people in terms of just looking at past data and trying to incorporate that and make a long-term play. And again, I don't disagree with this at all. I think overall, and when you want to fit all of the price data into one pattern, this does make sense because if you take into account everything here, you see the top of this line, nothing goes above it. The bottom of this line, nothing really goes below it. The point of this pattern is to incorporate everything. And what I want to draw your attention to here is two things, two lines. This line right here, the bottom line, I have had on here for about a year now. And this one is something I want to talk about, and it's going to primarily be the main talking point of this video. Now, one of the first things you notice, this is very zoomed out. You can see the halvings here, these lines in the left, the middle, and the right side of the screen. These represent the halvings and the coming halving for Bitcoin. But another thing that you do notice right away is that this bottom line, for the most part, is the bottom, except say for the past maybe year or so. And then what you notice on this top line here is that I don't incorporate a lot of these very extreme rises. And that's what I want to talk about in this video as well. And I think it plays very much into getting excited for 2020, specifically the second half of 2020. So that gives us about an 8-month build-up period starting now until the second half of 2020. Now, there are a lot of reasons why I think this is exciting, and I think for the most part, I think many people also agree with this, and it's kind of like a common thought. But something different about this is just something that I want to spend some time in this video talking about. So first thing I want to zoom into, and this is something I've talked about previously, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but this right here, the bottom line, acting as support, or resistance actually, you can see back in June, only 3-4 months ago of this year, and really beginning this descending triangle that we are now in the midst of maybe recovering from after the breakdown. Again, not super concerned with this play right here. I know a lot of people probably are covering it. If you're making videos every day, this is very important because it's the first time in about 3 or 4 weeks where we're testing this 200 moving average again and trying to get above it. But again, this pattern right here is not what I'm super concerned about. Again, more concerned about closing out 2019, closing out even this month, and going into 2020. That's what I think is very exciting. So yeah, let's zoom back out to the weekly chart. So something I also think is important to note is that I think I mentioned this before, that just these spikes out of this parallel channel are getting smaller. And again, I think that is why this chart is used, and it makes sense because it is rounding off in a way. So I think that's very valid there. And again, I'm not making this video to like talk about this chart and say I disagree with it. I do think it's very useful, and I think it makes sense, right? But the point of these two parallel channels that I'm trying to make here is that there is still opportunity for parabolic growth, and I'm not going to throw out a crazy number right now to say like, middle of 2020 we're going to be at $500,000 Bitcoin. I think that's a little silly. That's very crazy, crazy number to throw out, but I think there's going to be a very big increase in Bitcoin. But what I think is more important or exciting for a lot of people in this space is the overall shift that has happened in Bitcoin since 2017. 2017 was the very first time that altcoins started taking a huge percentage of the market cap. Now this is not a foreign chart for anyone. I think many people are very aware of this. 2017, the very beginning, you see Bitcoin above 85%, really never going below 80% except for one period back in 2014, essentially always up here. And then the only massive cliff you see here is really in 2017. And ever since then, it has been very clearly below 80% and even going as low as 35%, which is absolutely, very low compared to the history of it. So one thing I do want to say before we continue talking about this chart, this is for Bitcoin, is that I think this pattern is going to continue. Granted, in the bear market that we've been in for quite a while, you can see Bitcoin dominance has risen substantially. But I think that's why a lot of people right now are talking about alt season, alts this. Again, I do think Bitcoin has a place, and I guess I want to reiterate, I think altcoins have a place. I don't think altcoins as a whole are going to vanish. Meaning, it's a roundabout way of saying I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist, right? So I think this trend is going to continue. I think altcoins are going to continue, and you kind of see that in every market. Whether it's like the internet of like the 90s and early 2000s, whatever it is, there's not one. There are monopolies. There aren't monopolies. There are things that take up a huge percentage of the market cap, but for the most part, there is some competitiveness in everything. I find it hard to come up with an example of something where something is just completely dominating a market. The best thing that I can probably come up with right now in my head is like maybe Apple iPhones. But again, there are other competitors. Apple just has a huge grasp on that market, but there are other competitors. Now, again, I don't want to make that direct comparison saying like, Bitcoin is like Apple and everything else is. I think that's kind of silly, but I'm kind of making that comparison to say even in a market where seemingly one thing is very much dominating, there are other things that dominate. There are other things that have a substantial role in the market. Another example maybe be Intel processors. AMD is actually on the rise now, and Intel has a lot of backlash and everything like that. So again, with every market, there are things that are the most popular, and there are competitors. Again, it's a roundabout way of saying I think altcoins have obviously a place, and I don't think I really have to justify that because I think most of you guys agree with that. I don't think anyone on this channel is really I don't think anyone watching this video is really a Bitcoin maximalist. But again, going back to this chart here, I do think that as time goes on, it becomes less and less likely that we continue topping the top of this parallel channel here. So for example, if something would happen where about in the middle of the next halving, which would be right around here, we would top out at this chart. Again, I don't think that's likely, because what would that mean? That would mean Bitcoin is $1.3 million per Bitcoin. So of course, I don't think that makes any sense, especially when you factor in the idea that altcoins are taking more and more of the market cap and are becoming more and more used. And even if they weren't, even if Bitcoin maintained something like a 60% dominance in the entire market, this still would be unreasonable. This still wouldn't make any sense. So I don't think that's going to be the case, but I do think kind of factoring in percentage drops over the time of this passing through this parallel channel or whatever we want to call it here, I think that going into the next cycle, it makes a lot more sense to be putting the top of that period for Bitcoin around the bottom of this channel here, of this line. So what does that put us at? Easily over, let's actually look at this pretty clearly here. Easily over probably $40,000 by the middle of 2020, but going past that, it makes these crazy numbers seem more realistic. Now, we could push all the way out to 2023, 2024, looking at maybe, eventually getting to $500,000 Bitcoin, maybe 5 years from now, which I do think is likely. But again, guys, what I want to kind of shift to the perspective of the reason I focus on Bitcoin, because it's still a market leader, it still controls the market. I'm still very much on this idea that is going to change. I still very much subscribe to the fact that I think Bitcoin holds a very unique place in the market that may never be competed with, but I do think that it is possible that it does become possible that altcoins give it a run for its money, I guess you could say. That's to say, I don't think necessarily 2019 is going to have much of a impact on that. Going into the second half of 2020, though, I think is where we really might see some shifts and some changes and see altcoins really start to shine, because this, again, You've heard it a million times. The technology is so new. There are altcoins that bring technology that Bitcoin simply doesn't have, and there are things that Bitcoin has that other coins simply don't have. Whether it's security, long time, testing and proof of its work. You guys might have heard about all this quantum computing and stuff like that. Again, there are coins that kind of fight that and have more resistance towards that. And without getting into too much detail with that, maybe that becomes more of a problem in the future, considering Google had that little leak, I guess, talking about the quantum computing. And as time goes on, that's kind of inevitable anyway, that there are going to be computers that might be easily able to break certain cryptocurrencies codes and cause a lot of problems for them. So, and with any market, I think it's necessary for adaptation and changing. And I think that's another key feature that altcoins really do bring, is that it's easy for cryptocurrencies to adapt and have completely different codes and everything like that. And I think it's nice to have that big variety to pick from, because I do think there's going to be some real winners moving forward in the future. So with that being said, I do think that this pattern of topping out on these is slowly decreasing, and that's also reflective in this long-term chart. But I think the main takeaway of this, in my opinion, is that the main factor of why it's going to be decreasing for Bitcoin is because altcoins are going to be taking more and more, and maybe not even altcoins with too many coins included in that extra S there. Maybe it's only a handful. And I think that's actually what some people are counting on them. I think most people here watching this video are probably counting on a few handpicked of their favorite coins to do very well. And I do think that that's the most likely scenario moving, maybe 5 years in the future, is that a select few coins are going to be the really deciding factors here. But thanks for watching, guys. If you're new to the channel, make sure to leave that like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next upload.